Hello, I'm Ross Hamilton from Dublin, Ireland, and here to speak to the Finn class about all things Finn sailing. Yeah, well, I started sailing fins off the back of, I'd say lasers as a kid, but I was always a little bit big for lasers, and I was playing quite a lot of rugby in school and in university, and I got a little bit too big to sail lasers. And then because I was big while I was young, it's very hard to get onto the sort of academy sort of pathway. Most people at under 20s were sailing radials, and I was already in a full rig. So it was very difficult to break into that scene. And then when I went back to play rugby in college, I just got too big to really be competitive in lasers. And I was, I think, training partner for the guys who were competing for Beijing. I remember, yeah, that would have been about Beijing. In the winter, I'd do all the heavy air sailing with them and be training partner. And then one of the guys was sailing a fin and said that, you're probably wasting your time in lasers and you should have a go at the fin. So I did. And I think the goal was always probably for Rio, but because I was graduating 2 years or a year and a half, I think, before London, I thought, well, London logistically is just across the water. And if I can kind of make a sort of a fast attempt at London, maybe I might just sort of scratch into the qualification procedure or qualification kind of criteria. And I missed London pretty narrowly. I can't remember exactly how, but I was like one place or two places away. I think there's a few of us tied for the last spot. And then when we moved to Rio, the qualifications changed quite significantly. And I think I had a good look at the numbers and what I'd have to do to make that Olympics. And it was a bit of a roll of the dice. And then I think was it Santander was the qualifier? And I think I expected a light air venue, lost quite a bit of weight, got a really stiff mast, really big sail. And first day out, had a pretty good day in the light airs. And then we had something like 30 knots for 4 days straight. And I think it was pretty obvious on day two, day three that I sort of took the wrong gamble. But the way the qualification had changed, because I was from Europe, it was always going to be, you had to really be top out of everyone, because I think it was like top 20 nations or something like that. So mm-hmm. In the Finn class with all the equipment and everything else, like there's, I think, you can almost put a financial cost on what it's going to take to qualify. And for me, it was probably a pretty big stretch. Yeah, I saw the videos because my coach was videoing quite a lot from the side, and like I think I just pretty much saw the centerboard of my fin the whole way upwind, and then I'd catch like 20 people downwind, and then I'd just get blown out the back again on the upwinds. And I just wasn't heavy enough, and I just had the wrong gear for it. But I knew in the week before the fins had raced, I think it was the radials and a few others had raced, and they never got more than like 8-9 knots. So that was what I was training, and that was what I was expecting. But literally for the Finn event, I think we got 1 day of light airs, 1 day of no racing, and then 3 days of like 30 knots. But at that point, I think I'd already sort of made my peace. I knew that like I was going to have to roll the dice pretty hard to make sure that I was going to really sort of hit like the sweet spot. And I think when you do something like that, you're always taking a massive risk. So it was kind of a measured risk, and it just was not the right one. No. Well, I mean, since sailing, I've gone into performance management, and I've managed quite a lot of different Olympic kind of aspirants in different sports. And I think logistics are always what's going to kind of cripple most. I think most people talent is probably identified relatively early, and that's the difference between somebody getting through youth racing and not. I think work ethic will generally keep somebody into the point where they're now a senior international that might be thinking about Olympics. So really all that's left, I think, is logistics and finance. I think those are the two things that, if you're in a really good system where logistics are pooled to having a good, say, team, and there's good sort of sponsorship and sort of financial partners for that team, I think it can sort of circumnavigate a lot of issues. You'll always be able to share apartments on training camp. There'll always be some sort of logistic organization for getting a boat to one place or the other. And these are things that can cost you days of training, can make you stressed, can cost you money. That means you have to rule out an event. And I think that when you don't have any of those worries, you're automatically going to find yourself just sort of thriving a little bit better rather than just trying to survive. And certainly from other sports, that's exactly the same thing. Guys who can't make the qualifiers in Southern Hemisphere or can't spend 2 months on a training camp somewhere, for finance or for logistics, like that they always just will find life just a little bit harder. Whereas, if you come through as a 19, 18-year-old and you settle to a squad of maybe 10 people where there's already two people who are potential medalists who already have all of the resources to be medalists, you can almost sort of piggyback off that. And I think the confidence and expectations become almost subconscious, so that when you find yourself maybe 4 years in and it's your turn to kind of take over the reins, you're already sort of used to winning. You're already used to the expectations of winning, rather than somebody who's maybe on their own. Like, it takes a while to learn how to win, I think, and to really be comfortable winning, I think. But when you're around that the whole time, I think it kind of rubs off on you. And I think those sort of bigger organizations that have that built into them, I think it just is naturally a little bit easier. Maybe not easier is probably not the best word, but certainly you'll be more equipped. I think those are very hard things to replicate if you don't have the resources to do the same. You can kind of track that back. I mean, Annalise kind of broke ground there with being the first to really be competing at that level. Like, we've always had girls make the Olympics, but I think Annalise was the first person that I'm aware of that really kind of pushed to medal sort of levels. And then Aoife kind of came along behind with, the expectations that Annalise is who I need to be to be at that level. Mm-hmm. So now Eve comes in below with two people that are essentially world class, Olympic level and competitive, and that's all she knows. So suddenly when she's going to World Cup, she's no longer trying to qualify for the Olympics because we're a medal country in this class now. So she's now kind of taking over the reins of people who've gone before who just expect to win races. And so, like I said, it becomes ingrained. And then with Annalise, her coaches and the resources, like, they've been through that process of getting a medal before. So now that pathway is somewhat in place, and they just need to find talent and sort of the work ethic to kind of put through the machine, as it were. So, and it's not really a surprise that now people are starting. It's kind of like the 4-minute mile. When somebody breaks it first, it sort of becomes quite a reality, and the path has been kind of mapped a little bit. I don't know what the hard, like, there's loads of things that are difficult. I don't know if anything was super, super hard. I think, okay. I think probably the hardest part of being a fin sailor was that it's sort of like the old sort of proving grounds for, like, everyone who goes to the Olympics almost in the fin has won a European Championships or a European or like a World Championships in something, whether it's, the under 12s Optimus World Championship or the ISAF youths or like a full senior Europeans. Like, if you look at the lineup on the Olympic sort of medal race, the amount of medals and, big accolades and awards that are sitting there, like, it dwarfs other classes, because generally when you get a little bit older and a little bit bigger from winning in lasers for 5 or 6 years, then you move into the fin class where there's another 5 or 6 guys who've won in either lasers or something else. And it's kind of like where the sort of the old gladiators just go to kind of like finish out their years. So I think that for me, I used to love all of the sort of aspects of the fins. So I never found much of it necessarily hard. It suited me, but I think what made it particularly tough was that you weren't necessarily competing against your peers. You were competing against the old veterans who'd already proved themselves. So, I mean, the guys I remember training in my first training camp down in Perth when I first graduated. Like, Vasily was down there, and it was his first season in the fin, and he's like looking at me, giving like, and asking me questions about how to set up the mast, and I was like, I don't know, you've won like medals, like, why are you asking me? And like, he was kind of very new to the class, but that's who I was having to train against that day. A guy who's already won a silver medal. Like, I'm not training against another 20-year-old who's away from home for his first time. Where you going to get your massages and stuff? And I was like, what? Like, I don't get massages. Like, I go home and watch, like, eat cereal and watch Netflix. Like, and it's just, that was the difference in the fin. Whereas my friends who were in maybe the 49er or the laser, like, they were just going back and hanging out with me. We're all doing the same stuff. Like, you weren't having to turn up the next day against somebody who'd won 4 Olympic medals, I mean, yeah, but I think if you ask most fin sailors, like, your temperament, you want that. Like, you get around the top mark, you see that flag is up, you're like, right, let's see who's going to like push water for the next 20 minutes and just like break it. And I think that's sometimes where people who are extremely good sailors didn't like the fin was that, what do you mean I have to like work? It's not. But I think most people who go into the fin, the temperament is, wait till I get to this top mark and then it's go time. Like it's let's just see who's just willing to just like thump it the whole way downwind. And for me, it was definitely the case because I was always a little bit smaller. So when I was going upwind, it was just like survive to the top mark and then like just row the thing downwind if I have to. And so like for some people, I know I used to train with PJ, and I think like when he used to tip the top mark, it was just like, he just handbrake off and he would just be gone. So I don't know how many people, like if you're unfit and you get to the bottom of the mark, you'd be like, okay, I can't breathe and I feel like I'm dying. But I think you kind of put yourself in that position. That's sort of what you wanted, was to get to the top mark and just kind of like unleash whatever you have to try and pull away. And unfortunately, everyone else is doing the same. Look at the races in London with Jonas. Like, I don't know if Jonas, like, he was a very clever sailor, and I just remember him just becoming like so physical. And I think it was where you really saw the difference, was like everyone was like breaking themselves to be the fastest downwind, but I think everyone was fully prepared for it. So yes, it's hard, but I think mentally you're kind of really up for a downwind. First started and I was light, it was a case of if you mistimed a wave, the boom would literally pull you out of the boat and slingshot you out the other side of the boat. And that was where my issues were when I was a little bit smaller. If I didn't get my feet really planted in, I was going to get torn out the wrong side of the boat. But if you get it right, everything gets quite light and everything surfs. So you start like really stringing it all together and you sort of get into a bit of a cycle. And then it becomes, I suppose, like a bit of a dance or something where the timing kind of comes together and you really start yourself to feel yourself pulling away, and then you find that bit of a groove, and that's where the advantage and everything comes. Now, I wasn't the fastest downwind, but I know, talking to somebody like PJ, that you could see that's what was going on. He would just find a rhythm and then just slowly just pull away. But yeah, I think the thing with the fin was that like there was so much load involved that if it was really, really windy and you hit a wave, you just felt like the thing became a monster. Like you just felt the weight and pressure build so much that you were like, oh, this is gonna punish me if I make a mistake. But then on other days when you were, kind of felt that you found a rhythm, because like I think everyone's sort of more familiar with certain conditions. So where I sail in Dublin would have been very like Medemblik. So I always used to feel like I was particularly fast whenever we were racing in Delta Lloyd and somewhere like Weymouth. But then somewhere like Palma, I always felt a bit sluggish and a bit weird because it was just different. So I think when you got into a good rhythm and you could kind of feel something familiar, it always felt really, really good and you felt really relaxed and everything kind of came together. But when you got it wrong, it just felt like you had this like time bomb ready to go off underneath you, like make a mistake and it is going to throw you out the other side, which happened quite regularly to me. So yeah, I don't know, I always loved Palma and I've gone back so many times. Like I've raced, I do a lot of triathlon now, and I've raced in Mallorca quite a bit and always end up going back there. So I really, really like it, but I could never do it in Palma. Like that was like, it just broke me every time I raced there, whether it was windy or light winds. I'd always used to just walk in off racing in Palma being like, I don't know what it is about this place, but it just does not agree with me. I still think sailing has been the toughest sport I've done. I actually find other sports really easy since. I know it sounds a bit, but like sailing is the only sport where you can like work yourself to the bone and be the fittest and go the wrong direction and come in last to the top mark. You can almost get unlucky with the shift that you're the first to it. You're the first person to realize you've gone the wrong way sometimes, whereas other sports like triathlon, like put your head down, work harder, you generally catch up. Or, you can pretty much tell where you're going to finish based on what your numbers are. It's quite straightforward. Team sports like rugby I would have played, you've got the support of a team around you. So if you're not having a bad day, other guys can be playing fantastic. You can win a final having a terrible day because the rest of the team around you is playing great, and you have that backup. But sailing is the only one where you come in off the water and like nobody can do anything about the luck you've had, the bad shift you had, the result you had. Like it's really all on you, and you've got to be ready to go again the next day. You don't have like a week to go away and sort of work on things, or you don't have time to train. Like you've got to erase and reset for the next day. And mentally, I think there's very few sports that require you to do that on your own. And like, you'll have other sports where there's maybe a tournament, so you don't maybe move forward. But there's very few sports where you have like a bad day and then you really do have to reset for the next day. And you might have to do that like 5, 6 days in a row. So mentally it's tough, but also physically there's a lot of demands there in terms of recovery. So you got mental and physical recovery to do in a day, and you might be coming off the water 8 o'clock at night. So like from a management point of view, that's something that I think was valuable for me coaching, because guys trying to get professional contracts for something like rugby, the contract is there to ensure that they turn up to work every day. And for a lot of young guys, they're super talented, really good at rugby, but they don't know how to reset, recover for the next day. And that's something that sailing is like, it's just essential. So I think that's why I think it's probably the hardest sport I've had, is because those elements are things that aren't in other sports, and certainly not in the combination that they come in sailing. And then luck you can be so well prepared, but a bad shift, you've got to shake it off so fast. Even within the day, if you have one bad race, like, you've got to shake it off really quickly to get going again, and that can be really, really hard. So I think mentally it makes you pretty resilient. And then the other thing is, you're on your own in the boat. So if you capsize and I don't know, break something in the boat, like, it's really there up to you to get yourself to a finish line. And I think that's something that I've learned moving and kind of going through other sports. Very other sports require that level of sort of self-responsibility, if that's the term. You've really got to take things, you've got to really step up to get things done. And I think you do definitely get a sort of a level of independence or responsibility that I think very few other sports have. Certainly team sports, it's very hard to take that much personal responsibility when you're in a team, because you got other guys around you. But those who have that sort of aspect or that characteristic, I think you can kind of see them on a field as well. And when I coached rugby, some of our best players, you sort of dig down and you find, what did they do as the kids? They were sailing, and some of them are for the same club as me and things like that. And you could always kind of tell he's done like an individual sport. And I bet you it's something like sailing. You'd ask, and, oh yeah, I used to sail when I was 13, 14. So there's little traits there that I think are very good for other sports. Now, when I do sea swimming, like, we were talking about it the other day to some of the guys that I work with, and like, I just don't have any fear when it comes to sea swimming, because nothing is ever as bad as I've sailed in. So everything just seems fully manageable, whereas most people are terrified. Like, most triathletes are terrified as the swimming discipline. And from sailing, it's just so desensitized to just getting buckets of water in the face and being disorientated and whatever else. It's just second nature, and it just doesn't bother me anymore. Actually, like, sometimes you have so much coming in like at your face that, if you even see them in 15 minutes, you're kind of happy, okay, I'm going the right direction. Yeah, well, I think any sport at elite level, fitness is going to come into it. And I think you can see that very quickly when you race at like national level. The guys who are doing it full time, like, we can race an hour and not take the foot off the gas. But I think with the fin, when the speed differences, and to be honest, it's the same with other classes, when the speed differences can be either great or small, like the fin, you have to really work for half a knot. And if you're not working constantly, you don't get that half a knot. And when you have that half a knot over the course of, a kilometer and a half upwind, that it gives quite a bit of separation in the same downwind. So, it's one of those things that if you're going to be leaving that, like, that's one of the things you don't need to leave to chance. Like, you can be fit enough to race a race, but you can't always be perfectly in time with the shifts. So, I mean, if you're trying to make the Olympics, and it's going to be the case of, 10 boat lengths being the difference between qualifying and not, like, you're not going to leave anything on the table. And if fitness is going to be something that you can guarantee going into a race, then, like, you don't leave it as a chance thing. Like, you make sure you have it. And like, some people might neglect it, but certainly my background, I couldn't think of anything worse than knowing that there was maybe 2 or 3% left that I could have gone into the race with guaranteed, because I knew that there was going to be plenty in the race that wasn't guaranteed. So with the fin, with any sport that you've got an external load, like rowing or anything like that, when you're working against something kind of mechanical that you have to actually work against a load, you're not going to get away without a certain amount of physical ability. And obviously, the more you can be physically in control, the easier everything is, better decisions you make, the more generally in control you are. And again, for me, being slightly smaller than other guys, I could tell, especially in the breeze, that I couldn't do things that I wanted to do because I just literally didn't have the weight and size to do it. And that's something that I think that if you ask anyone in the fin class, I mean, you can even look at the results of the Olympics. Usually the smaller guys were towards the back, bar one. But anyway, generally speaking, big guys had a little bit of an advantage. The tall guys had longer levers for pumping. They had longer levers for hiking. So, physical attributes will, the natural ones will always help, but you still then try to make up the gaps. I would say I was probably one of the stronger guys around when I was racing, but I was also one of the shortest. So, that was how I tried to make up the ground on guys who were just bigger and taller and whatever else. And you definitely felt it in races. I mean, my fitness probably helped me gain speed downwind because I think I could pump harder for longer than most guys. But then upwind, I simply didn't have the height advantage. So I needed to be heavier. And I could tell that when I was over, say, 93 kilos, I could kind of compete. Anytime I fell below 93, I just couldn't compete. Even in the light hours, I didn't have enough to sort of turn the boat aggressively enough, especially on start lines and things when you needed to do a very quick U-turn and kind of get the hell out of a bad situation. I couldn't just turn a boat as hard as I wanted. Whereas when I got back into a laser, just messing around in winter series here in Ireland, I could throw a laser around like it was a toy. And guys who are the right size for lasers were like, how do you do that? I was like, because this is just nothing in comparison to fit. Like it's a toy. Like I can turn it on a knife edge if I wanted to, because it doesn't weigh anything. Like I'll break the rig before like I remember everyone sort of saying, the rudder only works if the boat's absolutely flat. In laser, that's not true. Because I've had like literally been able to break a mast because I was heavy enough and strong enough to keep it flat, and the rudder still didn't work on it. So, it's the physical side of things. It's not gonna win a race, but it certainly can lose you a race. Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, the laser is always felt. Laser in comparison, the laser just feels really, really light, and I think the tempo is higher. Like if you really want to push a laser, you just work it faster. Whereas the fin, it's just so much load. Like if you don't time the wave right, like you try to pump and it's like trying to pull a car, like it just doesn't move. And if you don't get the timing right, it's just so heavy, you just can't shift it. Whereas a laser, you can kind of always move it, but you just want to move it faster and faster and just keep the tempo up the whole time. Whereas a fin is sometimes it's just really timing, and then like one big pump, 90 kilos, kind of. That's when your weight was enough to actually get a bit of a purchase on the whole thing. Otherwise, it's just like you're like a flea trying to hit the thing, like it just doesn't do anything.